Welcome to the Planning Subcommittee A meeting. My name is Councillor Kath Whittam. I'm the chair of the Planning Subcommittee. Before we start, I need to make a few housekeeping announcements. The meeting is live streamed at Southwark Council's YouTube channel. Members, officers and members of the public are welcome to wear their face masks if they wish. Thank you. Firstly, there are no planned fire alarm tests today. If you do hear a fire alarm, leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is St John's Churchyard off Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. Public toilets are located by the main reception area. This is a no smoking building. Please ensure you do not smoke on the premises. Please can you switch off your mobile phones or put the phone to silent whilst in the meeting. Members of this subcommittee will not access the internet, send or receive emails, text messages or tweets concerning the business of the subcommittee. The code for accessing Southwark's council free Wi-Fi is capital FR33. Capital WIFI exclamation mark. I'd ask you to please be considerate towards other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceedings. I would also like to remind speakers to use their microphone when speaking, as only the audio from the microphones is captured on the live stream, and not to place their mobile devices next to the microphones to avoid interference. I would now like to ask officers to introduce themselves and explain their roles in this meeting. First of all, the planning officers.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dennis Ongweme. I'm Senior Planning Officer at tonight's meeting. My role is to represent the Director of Planning and Growth to advise members of this committee on planning and other general issues relating to the applications under consideration tonight. Thank you.
Dipesh.
Thank you, Chair. Dipesh Patel, Manager of the Major Applications New Homes team. I'm here to assist with item 9.1 Burgess Park.
Gemma.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Gemma Perry. I'm a planning officer in the Majors and New Homes team. I'm the case officer for item 9.1.
Liam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Liam Bullen. I'm the TPO officer for the Council, and I will be presenting item 7 and item 8 for consideration for confirmation.
And now the legal officer.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Sadia Hussain. I'm the legal officer. I'm here to advise the subcommittee on matters of planning law.
And Gerald.
Hello, I'm Gerald Gola. I'm a constitutional officer and a clerk to the subcommittee. I'm here to minute the meeting and to advise on the procedure for hearing the items and decision making.
Item 2, apologies. Are there any apologies for absence or lateness for this meeting? I've had apologies from Councillor Ennin, who is going to join us shortly. No, I don't think everybody else is here. Item 3, confirmation of voting members. Please will all the voting members of the committee indicate by raising their hand. Thank you. Item 4, disclosure of members' interests and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect to any item or issue to be considered at this meeting? Councillor Harper.
And I am a ward councillor for Faraday Ward, so some of the items sit within my kind of constituency.
Thank you. Item 5, notification of any items of business which the Chair deems urgent. The following additional documents are circulated prior to the meeting: the members' pack and the addendum report, which hopefully we've all had time to read. Item 6, minutes. Can we approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 25th of January 2022? There's not many of us left from that.
Yes, Chair, yes.
And I agree as well. So, I'll do that in a minute, can I? So we move on to item 7, Tree Preservation Order 644, Confirmation Report, Rylestone Grove Park, SE5 8LT. Pages 6 to 28 of the agenda pack and the members pack. Liam, you're on.
Thank you, Chair. So,
1 second.
sorry.
Is she in time to join?
She's in time to join.
You're in time to join.
Chair, just to confirm, yep, so the item hasn't started to be, and the report officer hasn't started to present the report, therefore it's okay for Councillor to join. If she could just make a declaration of interest, if there is any, and then we can get the...
Voting member.
Confirm you're a voting member, and also whether you've got a declaration of interest, if we can just...
Sorry, I've just missed everything.
So, are you a voting member of this
Yes.
subcommittee? And do you have any declaration to
No.
make?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So item 7 concerns a confirmation of a tree preservation order which, in the receipt of a minimum of 1 objection, is reserved for Planning Subcommittee. The recommendation is that the provisional tree preservation order, reference 644, is to be confirmed unamended. It was served on the 26th of January 2022, and it was in response to a Section 211 notification, which is for works to trees in a conservation area. Where, on the basis of consideration that the council wishes to intervene, the recommendation is for a TPO to be placed. The council, on receipt of a notification, has 6 weeks in which to issue a provisional tree preservation order, and this, as I said, was served in January of this year. It relates to 3 trees, an oak, a yew and a cypress. We do not send out partial discharges on notifications, as that's not within our control. We cannot we cannot issue conditions to a notification for works to trees in a conservation area. The decision flow is to either intervene, in this case, with the serving of provisional TPO, or to allow the 6-week period to lapse, at which point then there would be a decision not to intervene, or there would be no decision issued at all. So the oak is rather an interesting shape. But as I said, we cannot issue a partial discharge for notifications. So the order was in respect of the notification as submitted to the council, and there were no further amendments or revisions to the specification during the period of consideration. We also have the yew here. And the tall cypress, which you can see to the rear of the London Plain street tree. One objection to the TPO was received within the notification period, and this was in relation to inclusion of the trees, including the cypress. There was a concern of the site owner that the tree was dangerous, although they had not provided any evidence to that. They do not need that under a notification, it should be stated. And after the issue of a provisional TPO, there is every opportunity for a owner of a tree to submit a further TPO application with significant evidence base for the removal of trees that they believe to be of concern. So the item before that's the the strength of the objection in this instance, I have visited site and I have not seen any reasons as to why the cypress should be removed. We have received a separate TPO application, but this was only for the oak and other trees which surround Rilston, which comprise lime and smaller fruit trees. Works were consented to reduce the oak and to improve its form. So, in essence, it's officers' consideration that this TPO should be recommended for confirmation, and that any further applications for works or removal are supported by evidence. Without this, the trees do have a temporary protection of being within a conservation area. But the likelihood is that without significant evidence that we would issue a further TPO, should this not be confirmed tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. Any questions for Liam? The temper score is, you only get one temper score for the 3 trees.
Well, the tempos on sites of multiple trees are generally a median. We do look at each tree individually, and we assess them, and then we take generally the lowest scoring on visibility as across the site. It is normal practice to do this for a site, that we issue one overall tempo scoring. In this instance, the tempo, if you just bear with me,
19.
Attained a score of 19 out of a potential total of 25, and this would justify that the TPO was merited. All 3 trees are publicly visible in almost their entirety, and are considered to provide amenity, which is for which the council has a statutory duty to preserve.
Thank you. Still no questions? Does any objectors in the room wish to speak on this tree protection order? No. So we shall move to the vote. Oh, any ward councillors wish to speak? There's only Faraday councillor. Okay. Anybody want to say anything about this TPO? Or shall we just move to the vote? Okay. So having heard the evidence, and if there are no further questions, we will move to the motion. That the Provisional Tree Preservation Order TPO reference 644 be confirmed and amended. Does anyone wish to second this? Thank you, Councillor Livingston. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll move to item 8.
Thank you, Chair. Item 8 is...
Hang on. Tree Preservation Order 645, Confirmation Report 2 Belvoir Road, London SE22 0QY, and land to the east of 2 Belvoir Road, London SE22 0QY. Pages 29 to 46 of the Agenda Pack, Members Pack and Addendum Report, pages 1 to 3. Now, Liam.
Thank you, Chair. TPO 645 was served in consideration of a pre-application that was submitted to Urban Forestry for consideration. It was felt that without the temporary provision of a conservation area, that trees would be at threat of removal and not be considered for mitigation planting in line with policy P61 of the Southwark plan. The trees in question are visible from the junction of an access road and Belvoir Road itself. The group of trees to the right are also covered by an area order TPO 568. This TPO identifies the lines within that group, as well as a single pair for which the council had received prior notification from a close neighbour of the amenity value that confers on them, along with the lime and the cypress to the rear of the property, which provides screening from to Belvoir Road to Belvoir Lodge itself. Since production of the report, we have received two further considerations, and one is on the inclusion of the cypress, insofar as it was considered by the site owner and their agent to be a risk or a safety concern. I will note to members that I visited site today to review the tree since issuing of the TPO, and it is still in situ. The council has not received any further submission for works to the TPO since the provisional order was issued, save for a notification of exempted works to a large fallen branch on March the 7th of this year and following Storm Eunice. The site owners have had ample time in which to submit a further application for works under a TPO application, which is the correct manner to deal with the issue raised, prior to confirmation or not thereof. Where removal of trees subject to a tree preservation order is consented, there is a statutory duty to replant under section 207 and 213 of the Town and Country Planning Act. As regards the tempo or tree evaluation method for preservation orders, whilst we do undertake these for all tree preservation orders, they are not necessarily a requirement with regards to section 197 of the Act, which relates to development in securing replacement planting, securing the planting or preservation of trees within a development site. For sites with multiple trees, the median values contribute to the overall scoring, and we have a breakdown for each of the trees within the addendum report, if you so wish, but the median score was 12, which results in a scoring which would state that a TPO was defensible legally for this site. Retention ages are in accordance with the particular species, which is outside of the BS 5837, which is trees in relation to design, development and demolition and construction, and relevant to the age groupings as advised by the Arboricultural Association. Of the understanding that site owners and their agents are in the process of submitting a full planning application, it should be noted by members that a full planning permission overrides a tree preservation order, as works required to implement a permission are accepted. This officers consider a suitable protection of rights as it pertains to the planning system, paragraph 131 of the NPPF, London Plan Policy G7 and Policy P61 of the Southwark Plan. With trees as covered by an order given material consideration within the planning system and with due regards to the relevant policies outlined above. Having taken into account the additional responses and other additional information following consideration of the issues raised, the recommendation remains that the order is confirmed as unamended. with the site owner advised to submit an application for works to the trees or a full planning application in the usual manner. Whilst there is no right of appeal against confirmation, the affected parties can apply with further evidence to carry out works should that be considered necessary. This is considered to be sufficient protection of the rights of all parties concerned and their ability to enjoy and protect their property. Thank you.
Go on then.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to explore what we've had in the addendum report regarding the cypress tree and the site owner and their agent stating that this creates a safety concern to number 2 Belvoir Road as well as Belvoir Lodges. I'm not necessarily particularly familiar with the area. On the map that you've shown, where are Belvoir Lodges?
They're off Overhill Road, so Dulwich Hill Ward.
Yeah.
And
but is Belvoir Lodges shown on this?
Belvoir Lodge is the small block to the north of the cypress and the lime, and number 2 Belvoir Road is indicated by the number 2.
And so number 2 seems some distance from that cypress tree, so I couldn't quite understand how the cypress tree could create an issue for it. I could understand how it might do for the lodge.
I think that's what they were alluding to. Storm Eunice was an unforeseen event. I was in consultation with the site owners in March of this year with regards to fallen branches, and fallen branches are an exception to the requirement to notify, subject to 5 days notification. So we dealt with that under that in that respect. With regards the tree, I did go down today just to ensure that it was still standing and just to have a view from public realm as to anything which was overtly of concern. But save for entering up very close to the tree, it is not necessarily the remit of myself to go and judge that. It is to assess arboricultural reports as provided by the tree owner in respect of an application. As stated, I believe that they have had ample time since the serving of this order, if they were so concerned about the health and safety of the tree, to submit an application to the council with supporting evidence.
Just to follow that up, I mean, so the owners of the site have said there's an issue with the tree. You're saying that they've not evidenced that. What communication has there been from the council that they needed to evidence that?
Well, the responses were today, in the most part, and yesterday, from the site owner as to the safety of the tree. When discussed at the time, I advised the applicant to update their tree survey, but we had not received any further communication until they were informed that the item would be heard before the committee today.
So they've had that advice that they could submit that, and they haven't done until today, and all they've done today is just say it's there's risks to it, but they've not provided anything more substantial, and you pre-warn them that's what they would need to do. Is that a fair summary?
My response in March, on March 7th of this year, was that they needed to update their assessment of the site with regards to trees, but that has not happened.
Thank you.
Can you tell me what's the lowest score that is defensible?
11.
And without this TPO, there's no protection at all for these trees if it lapses?
That's correct, Chair. They're not covered by anything. We know that they're there, but the site owner has every right to remove any tree prior to the submission of a planning application, and then we have no recourse for mitigation.
So if they did chop them down, they won't have to replace them?
That's correct.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, is there anybody who wishes to speak in support of in objection to the TPO? Anybody wish to speak in support of the TPO? Is anybody, is any ward councillor? So I would suggest we move to a motion. Having heard the evidence, I would like to move that we adopt the officer's recommendation as printed in paragraph 1 of the report on page 29 of the agenda pack, that the Provisional Tree Preservation Order TPO reference 645 be confirmed unamended. Does anybody wish to second this? Councillor Salmon, thank you. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Right, thank you, Liam. You can go. So, the next item, item 9, is development management. Planning guidance, conduct at meetings. The next item on the agenda is the determination of development management planning application. Before we proceed to the business, I would like to outline the guidance on the conduct of business. We will hear from the officer who will present the report, outline the recommendations and answer questions or clarify any issues raised by members of the subcommittee. Any representative present that wishes to speak can address the subcommittee for 3 minutes, which will be taken in the following order. 1 spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. You need to have identified a single spokesperson. If more than 1 objector wishes to speak, the time will be divided accordingly within the 3-minute time slot. Then the applicant or agent. Then 1 spokesperson representing any supporters of the application who live within 100 metres of the development site. And then a ward councillor representing those affected by the proposed development. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspects of the application. At the end of each representation, the subcommittee may ask questions of the presenter. After receiving all submissions, the subcommittee will debate the application and consider the recommendation. This is a council subcommittee meeting which is open to the public. There should be no interruptions from the audience. Finally, although the planning subcommittee comprises of members from different political parties, we are not politically whipped. The decisions we make today are in accordance with the council's planning policy and based on information contained in the relevant reports and addendum report, and any verbal submissions made today. How we approach these applications is set out in the Development Management Report at item 9, and if members are happy to note that report, we will move on to considering the planning applications. Are members so agreed? Thank you. So we move to 9.1, Burgess Park Community Sports Pavilion, Burgess Park Community Sports Ground, 106 Coburg Road, London SE50JB. Application number 21AP 3625. Pages 51 to 87 of the main agenda pack, members pack and addendum report, pages 3 to 5. So we will ask the officer, Gemma Parry, to present her report.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to a construction of a basketball court with perimeter fencing and installation of 2 LED floodlights to be provided within the consented Burgess Park Sports Centre facility to provide wheelchair sports provision and a court to play basketball on. So the plan in front of you shows the aerial view as existing. So you have the Burgess Park football pitch to the east, the lake to the north, and then the previous barbecue area, which is currently or temporarily closed, to the west. So the plan in front of you is the location plan. So the blue line boundary that you can see was the red line boundary for the consented scheme. So this application sits slightly outside of that, as you can see in the corner for the red line boundary, but it will form part of the wider site. So this site plan then shows it in the context of the consented scheme. So the two larger artificial grass pitches that you can see on the screen and wider site already has permission, and this application just relates to the red line boundary basketball court to the west. So site notice. So in terms of consultation responses, site notice were placed in November, and then again additional site notices were placed earlier this year surrounding the site, but also park entrances. We've received now, 183 comments on the application, so 25 in support, 2 neutral, and 156 letters of objection. Support for the basketball facility is focused around need for the provision, encouraging outdoor sports and active lifestyles, diversity in sport, and providing a positive community asset that isn't currently delivered within the park. There was a neutral comment provided as well about ensuring that there will be ease of access, given that it's a wheelchair accessible court. Access is going to be step free, obviously, given the site is already consented. They couldn't get there wasn't a way to get the court any closer to the indoor changing rooms, which are sort of the white building in the centre of that image, but the access is step free, and so wheelchair accessible changing facilities and parking to be secured through condition for wheelchair accessible use. In terms of the objections, I'll just sort of run through these points now. The principle of development, so the proposed use meets national and local planning policy tests for appropriate development within metropolitan open land, so it would be retained within the open land designation, and is consistent with the policy definitions for appropriate development within metropolitan open land. In terms of over provision, this facility would provide a basketball court that isn't currently a basketball court available in Burgess Park, and also it will provide a wheelchair facility, sports facility, which the site currently doesn't provide. So there are wheelchair accessible changing rooms to be delivered within the consented scheme, but there is not currently somewhere that wheelchair users can play sport. So in terms of the comments regarding loss of publicly open green space and loss of the area where the court is proposed, which has sort of previously been used sort of as picnic area ancillary to the adjacent barbecue area. So the ball court obviously sits predominantly within the development boundary of the consented scheme, albeit slightly falling out of that red line boundary to the east. And it would replace the provision of spectator mound. So the consented scheme currently was to provide a spectator mound in this location, so that wouldn't be provided, and this wheelchair sports court would be provided instead of that. So it wouldn't sit any closer to the lake to the north, and obviously would sit adjacent to the barbecue area, albeit sort of very close. So there'd still be a spectator mound to the south and to the north of the courts as consented. And in terms of openness, the fencing is proposed as a Zane type sports fencing. So that's sort of less visually intrusive. Than it's not solid fencing, and to retain that open feel. And it matches the fencing that's been consented around the adjacent artificial sport courts. So this is shown on the elevation, sort of up until we get to the sort of where there's an A written. That's what's consented, and so this is going to add an additional stretch on. So if I go back to this image here, yeah, so the fencing will continue round from where's consented for the artificial grass pitches and around the court. In terms of, so I mean, yeah, currently it's just sort of grassed, low ecological value in terms of the existing land use. Albeit there was obviously going to be a spectator mound consented here, which would have provided some ecological enhancements. So we've agreed with the ecologist to recommend a condition for 500 square metres of wildflower meadow planting sort of within the park site to ensure that that's still secured. So I mean, yeah, and this provision is a positive feature of the scheme in terms of an outcome of the council's public sector equalities duty. So the equalities impact assessment that was undertaken identified that this sports facility that has been consented doesn't currently provide this provision. And then if I go back to the consultation responses, in terms of environmental impacts, Southwark's environmental protection team and ecologist have reviewed the application, obviously in the context as well of the wider consented scheme, and they raised no concerns with the proposal in terms of ecological impact, light pollution, noise nuisance and land contamination subject to planning conditions, which are listed in Appendix 1 of the report pack. And the drainage will follow the same approach as the consented scheme and connect to the lake to prevent any additional output into the sewers, so it won't put any extra pressure on that. In terms of security, prevention and social behaviour, the court obviously, as I said, sits within the Burgess Park sports facility, so enclosed behind the 4.5 metre fence, which will manage access and reduce potential for antisocial behaviour, and obviously the controlled access would prevent use of the court out of hours. Obviously, it needs to be bookable for matches and competitions, but there is a proposal, the sort of wider site, there'll be a mix of paid and free use for residents, and players will enter through the building on the image previously to be able to access the toilet facilities, water, etc. We also had some additional comments in regards to the consultation and sort of misleading information with the site notices, which showed obviously the court on the existing location plan. So site notices were placed, as I said previously, and then again additional site notices were placed around park entrances to widen the consultation, and they showed the red line boundary of the proposed court, which is what we're required to do, and the development description, which obviously references the court in the context of the wider consented scheme, and provided application reference numbers for both the proposed and consented scheme, as well as my contact details as case officer. And then the plans provided, which I can go through now, obviously show the plans to be approved would show the court in the context of the wider scheme. So it's sort of being brought forward, as part of that scheme rather as as individually. So yeah, the elevation here and here. So this elevation, is from the north. So looking at it from the north, so you can see the spectator mound that's still to be delivered to the north, and yeah, it shows the fencing sort of in the context of the consented scheme. And then this is looking from the west, so from where the barbecue area is, again in the context of the fencing already approved. In terms of lighting, so 2 LED floodlights are attached to columns that are to be provided on the adjacent eastern courts, and they've provided an artificial lighting assessment which demonstrates compliance, sort of facing away from residential development, and both the ecologist and EPT are satisfied subject to planning conditions. So this shows the contour in the wider site context. And again, ecological value, as I think I've sort of covered with the with the objections, but the existing is flat grass parkland with sort of limited ecology value, but obviously the 500 square metres of wildflower planting will provide ecological enhancement overall. So in summary, as I said, the principle of the development in terms of a sports facility is acceptable within metropolitan open land and acceptable in the context of the existing site, which is, the area of that park is already used for sports facilities. Therefore, we're satisfied that there wouldn't be a harm to the openness of the mole or attraction from the character. As I said, it meets the need for a court of this likeness within the park, but also specifically within the Burgess Park sports facilities, which, as I said, are providing changing rooms, but nowhere for wheelchair users to play sport. In terms of the adjacent barbecue area, obviously this court wouldn't sit on it, but it obviously sits very close to it. That barbecue area is currently closed and is due to remain closed until a review from the council's parks department has been undertaken to assess the most suitable location and type of barbecue area to be provided in the park. And this predates this submission and was reasons for closing the barbecue area initially was safety of park users and protection of the environment. Subject to the planning conditions that I've discussed, we are satisfied to recommend the committee approves planning permission for this development. Thank you.
Can you just go through what's in the addendum?
Yeah, of course. So the addendum picks up recent representations, which I have sort of discussed through my presentation, but we just received additional comments, including from Friends of Burgess Park, which cover comments that weren't previously written into the report. So they were to do with the information provided at consultation for site notices, the visual impact in terms of the fencing sort of being visually intrusive, and the need for the court in terms of what the provision, needing that basketball provision, which, as I said, is a outcome of the public sector equality's duty to provide a positive impact in terms of delivering for disabled users in terms of protected characteristics. So I've listed the additional the numbers of comments received following the publication of the report last week. And then it also picks up on the public sector equalities duty clarification. So reference of the report in paragraph 7, 26 and 34 state that the provision is a requirement of the public sector equality duty, which our legal team have advised is not quite the right wording. So it's a disability is obviously a protected characteristic. So therefore the provision of the wheelchair accessible court is a positive feature, as it would provide a facility for a disabled person. So that's clarification on the role of the public sector equalities duty.
I have a number of questions, but I'm quite happy for somebody else to start. Councillor Harper.
Just one question about the wheelchair accessibility of the sports centre in general. When I could have got confused when I was reading through the kind of equality statement, but in terms of how many wheelchair users at once could be using the sports centre, it seems like there's only one wheelchair accessible toilet and only one changing room which would be wheelchair accessible. So I know that somewhere else it said that the court could be used for wheelchair kind of sports where there's multiple wheelchair users. I was just wondering if that would be practical given the kind of nature of the changing rooms and toilets as they currently are, and as you mentioned, there's only the 2 blue badge parking spaces. It's not that close to any tube stations, and I was wondering if you could speak on that. So
the ball court obviously would be. I think that part of the intention is for it to be used for competitions and. I don't know, Depeche, you have.
I think, thank you, Councillor. So the sports facilities, as it's already been approved, doesn't form part of this application, but you're absolutely right to pick up on those things. And Chair, that might be something that the applicant can answer, if that's okay.
We can ask the applicants when they're here. Councillor Livingston?
Thank you. Just a quick technical question. What's the distance between the northwestern corner of the site and the water edge?
I don't have that distance in front of me. It doesn't sit any closer to the north, but obviously, yeah, the lake does drop down to the northwest. But yeah, I don't have that. I don't have that measurement.
I was just trying to understand the visual impact of that new fence on the openness of the footpath and yeah, to understand that. But thank you. Okay, so I'll have to guess at that. Thank you.
Councillor Salmon?
Thank you, Chair. I did ask this before, but if I can ask this in this meeting, what is the reason that we have to have a separate ball court for people with wheelchairs?
So the surface on the artificial grass pitch isn't suitable for wheelchair sports. I think that the applicant will be able to give a bit more detail about in terms of the Football Association's requirements for the surface of the artificial grass pitch. But yeah, that it's not suitable for wheelchair user sports. So obviously this would be a different surface.
Councillor Harper?
Sorry, one more question, and this relates to the previous plan where you said there's the mound. Is that kind of a fenced off mound, or would that be kind of just open for like anyone to walk up and down? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the spectator mounds essentially would be usable for anyone to sit on. So they were going to sit sort of around all three. So there's still two to be delivered, and they were going to have some additional planting on for ecological enhancements.
Thank you.
Would they be outside the fence or inside the fence?
The mounds outside the fencing. Yeah.
So we're fencing off a bigger bit.
Yeah, so this would be an additional part. So in the apologies, I know it's not very well, it's a bit sort of zoomed out. But on the right hand side where you can see the letter A, that sort of from the right of there is the additional. It is annotated, but it's apologies, really small. Yeah, I think it's written on there, is it? Yeah. From there, yeah.
Any other questions, or shall we move on? Okay, we'll move on to the objectors. So, have you decided who's speaking? Just you. Okay, then we come forward. I'm sure you've been before. Yeah. So, if you could introduce yourself first, and then I will give you 3 minutes to speak. So it's the single button.
Hello, good evening. My name's Susan Crisp and I'm on the management committee of the Friends of Burgess Park. I will just introduce my colleagues, although I know they can't speak. So with me, I've got two other members of the Friends of Burgess Park Management Committee, which is Sam Tilling and Monica Hiram. And we're also delighted to have Burgess Sports with us as well, with Ali as well. So I'm ready to go. Thanks. So Friends of Burgess Park object to the ball court. The points we want to make are about three things: metropolitan open land and openness, equalities legislation, and consultation. So firstly, metropolitan open land and openness. Our objections rest on the principle of openness of metropolitan open land, and on that basis the application should be refused. London Plan Policy G3 says that metropolitan open land is afforded the same status and level of protection as green belt, and that metropolitan open land should be protected from inappropriate development in accordance with national planning policy. The National Planning Policy Framework on the green belt says that local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the green belt, and very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the green belt is of inappropriateness and any harm resulting is clearly outweighed by other considerations. The NPPF does not say it is automatically okay to build sports provision. It says, as long as the facilities preserve the openness of the green belt. Openness of metropolitan open land is not about a spatial designation, but should also be considered in terms of visual impact. This development impacts on the openness of Burgess Park, particularly at this location, because of the visual impact of the fencing and the sight lines from the park, across the park from the Lake Bridge, and the positioning of the bridge as part of the routes across the park, linking north-south and east-west. We can say more on this if asked. Equalities legislation. The planning report refers to equalities legislation. Clearly, the council should be facilitating accessible sites for disabled basketball, but that does not mean the only or best site is Burgess Park. The proposal for the basketball court seems to respond to the accessibility report of the Sports Centre, which noted that the AstroTurf is not suitable for wheelchair users. However, there is no documentation within the planning reports that show the council has carried out an integrated impact assessment looking holistically at the needs across all equalities groups and the park and the impact of the basketball court on the park. We can add more on this if asked. Consultation. The Burgess Park Master Plan, which was very detailed and involved extensive consultation and engagement, does not include a basketball court at this location. The sports centre footprint in the master plan retains clear views from the bridges and the pathway network.
Chair, could I ask, would you like to say any more?
Thank you. So just to finish off on consultation, once Friends of Burgess Park produced some information in early June to alert people to the development, we rapidly increased the objections threefold within 10 days. Friends of Burgess Park canvassed people at the barbecue areas and no one knew about this development. In terms of further lines on openness, which is the only extra bit that I will just go into, the expansion of the sports centre has already fenced off significant additional area of Burgess Park. The additional land for the ball court is extremely significant at that location, and the impact is to the detriment of park openness. The fencing is 4.5 metres high, that's almost 15 foot. And the basketball court fencing line extends across the sight lines from the bridge, reducing openness and views. So, as you've already pointed out from questions, the fencing is inside the viewing mounds and then extends further out around the basketball court. The other points on equalities is that no account is taken of the large number of people who use the parks and the importance of green space for health and well-being, and space which is free and open access. Green space is not an empty space waiting for development. Park safety is also an issue with all that fencing and the narrow pathways, and the point that Richard made about the narrowness of the fencing. There's a narrow path and then there's the lake. Thank you.
Any questions of the objector? Councillor Harper?
You mentioned something about the integrated impact assessment and the different, how that related to the equalities impact statement.
I must confess I haven't checked all this back to back But my understanding is that for the sports centre, there was an assessment made in terms of an accessibility access report was made, and that flagged up various things. That is not the same as an integrated impact assessment. An integrated impact assessment should definitely be looking across all the different equalities groups, of course, within the legislation, but also not just from the point of view of the sports centre, but from the point of view of the impact of the sports centre and the basketball court on the wider park users, the wider population. So it is holistic.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if officers could move the slides back to slide 12, please. The reason I ask this is that blue line on that diagram shows what's already been agreed in the outline plans for the sports centre, and so the red line is showing the court that we're looking at now. And clearly, most of that site is within the blue line that's already been consented, and it does feel as if a number of the issues that you raised are ones which are already covered by the permission that's already been given in terms of development. So I just wondered if you had any comments on that point.
It's the extra fencing. It's the addition of the extra fencing. So within that consented blue line is what's called the viewing mounds, and the viewing mounds are 2 metres high, and they are outside of the fencing. So it moves the fencing line back to only slightly beyond. You can't. This diagram doesn't show. Well, I presume that line sticking out into the top left-hand corner probably leads to the bridge, and the fencing now extends significantly that little bit further, that in terms of sight lines and viewing and openness, that extra fencing is quite critical from when you're on the bridge and you're looking across, because you don't have that. There's a whole other section. So at the bottom of the map there, beyond the blue sports centre line, there's another whole section of Burgess Park. So it's that sense of openness across the park. And I mean, it's quite noticeable. And councillors who've been in other planning applications that have impacted on Burgess Park, the point from the bridge is taken for some other planning applications as a viewing line. So you look down the lane, the lake, but obviously that bridge was placed across the lake to be part of the enjoyment of coming to the park and walking across the bridge. And now what you're walking towards is a fence, and that additional fencing that will be round the basketball court makes a very, very significant difference to the openness of the park, because you are in effect drawing a curtain across, you're drawing a wall across. So it is, it is always with these things, it is balancing up and weighing the different needs and the different uses. But our view would be that in terms of the way this has been approached, the views of park users have not really been given adequate consideration compared to sports users.
Any other questions? Councillor Salmon?
Thank you. Thank you for everything you've said. Can I ask, you made a vague reference to why here. Did you mean physically why in this place in the park, or did you mean another park should have this basketball facility, or is there another place you were thinking?
I can't wave a magic wand and come up with a magic solution to where the alternative place should be. There has been other open access ball courts on Burgess Park, which were removed when the BMX track went in, and there's been a sort of long-held desire to have an open access, that sort of provision. Obviously, this isn't open access. It's part of the sports provision and it's fenced off. And in that instance, it is about why in that particular location, because it has such an impact on the openness. So it is about why that location. there was other sort of original plans to have one somewhere else, more towards Coburg Road, but for various reasons that didn't pan out.
Thank you.
Councillor Harper?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry if this is an out-of-order question, so please correct me if it is. This is my first planning meeting. But you said you brought Burgess Sports with you, and I was just wondering if you, as a representative of Friends of Burgess Park, could speak to the consultation you've had with them, which I'm assuming you have or spoken.
We worked obviously, Park Friends Group, of course, we work very closely with all the groups in the park. But we did work very closely with Burgess Sports in terms of both groups opposing the original sports centre planning application. But it's there and it's gone ahead now. So, I think it is this question about why a basketball court additional to this sports centre in Burgess Park. It feels like it's a knee-jerk reaction to the accessibility report that was put forward, and then this was like an add-on.
Would you like to come forward?
You mean me?
Yeah. Can you just state your name and who
Yes,
you
good evening.
represent?
My name is Alexandro Texido. I'm Ali. I'm the CEO of Burgess Sports.
So, what have you to do with the sports centre?
With the sports centre? Well, sometimes we use the sports centre. We are a small charity, but we deliver a huge amount of services for local community. Most of them are for free. So our most popular program is the holiday programs that we do a multi-sport scheme for girls and boys from 5 to 12 years old and 13 and plus. They join to our ambassador leadership course. So basically, during the holidays, our participants will come from 9 to 3. And they do different sport activities. We provide all the equipment and food. So it's a very important service for low-income families. As I said, most of our services are for free. And from time to time, we use the sports center. But I must say that it's not on a regular basis as we wish. We always have to, we're a homeless organization. And last year only, we have 547 unique participants, which means it was 547 unique people coming over and over again to our services, to our programs. So we have over 6,000 attendances, just considering the daily attendances, not the number of hours that they were engaged with us. And we are opposing because of what she was explaining, and also because I think the fact fencing off more sport facilities is just pushing away our low-income families that cannot afford or book themselves, the places, which is I'm very pro-disability and inclusion. Back in my country, I used to run an organization that was working with people with disabilities, so for a second, don't think that do not consider that as an important matter. But surely, we could reconsider rather than rebuilding something else and increase the footprint. Maybe rethink now that the sports center is not finished, how we can maybe adapt some of the areas if it's so important. We don't know who asked for this. We certainly haven't. And yes, we wish to have probably a sports center that is open for the people. We see an increasing number of population in the area, and according to that, it's also decreasing the number of spaces, open spaces for our families and our children to enjoy. So I think protecting the park as a whole is very important. To provide sport places is important, but also enjoyment and places for the families to work and be in contact with nature is equally important. So we need to be very careful, in the way that we treat that small space. It's a lovely park. It serves an amazing community, but we need to be very careful because, yeah, I mean...
So do you use any, what bits of the park do you use then?
I use the whole park. I mean, because, as I said, we are delivering lots of...
What sort of things do you do?
Well, we use the tennis center, for instance, when we do our programs. We use the park itself to run our after-school program and reading comprehension club. So
any buildings?
Yes, we use buildings. We deliver a food program, which is like similar to giving ingredients for families with a recipe. And we call Kids in the Kitchen because the idea is the parents to cook with children, and we deliver that program in the Buffett building. It's next to the First Place nursery.
So do you use any Southwark Council facilities?
That's a Southwark Council facility.
Okay.
But it's under the lease of the Southern Tigers Rugby Club. So they allow us to deliver our program there.
Okay. Councillor Salmon?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned a number of young children. What do you do for the children that come to you who have disabilities? Where do they go? Where do you take them to enjoy sports and things like that?
We don't have children with physical disabilities, but we do have children with mild autism and learning difficulties. And that number of participants is just on a rise, it's increasing. So actually this year we've been training our coaches in that topics. Unfortunately, we can't, the number of participants that I'm expecting for this summer is 200 a day. So it's difficult to commit to deliver for every single specific need. So we've been training our coaches in working with low-income families, managing difficult behavior. Now we are working, training them to develop awareness in autism and attention deficit disorder. So try to keep, as much as possible, our services inclusive. But we haven't reached to the point yet, to work with people with physical disabilities.
Councillor Harper?
Thank you, and thank you. Sorry, I think this is just kind of a clarification on the kind of spaces you use for doing sport activities. Am I right in thinking you do use the tennis courts in Burgess Park and the sports centre before it's been on occasion, but it's prohibitive because that actually costs and there's other activities you can do for free? Is that right? You use kind of both the sports provisions, but then also the open space for your programme?
Yeah, we have to, in the sports centre, you can apply for 3 hours. And last year, for instance, I found it very difficult to find a location to run the program, so I used part of the program in the free area and some other part of the program in what is called the cage with the cricket and the rugby. And they give me a special fee, and I booked the rest of the program there. This year I won't be able to use that because the council was asking me to provide provision for water, to put more waterloos, to provide shelter.
Sorry, Chair, if I may interrupt. I can appreciate that members of the committee want to hear from all of the objectors, but I'm just a bit conscious that we seem to be straying away from material planning considerations, and we're now kind of getting into the realm of just asking which areas of the park the objectors use. So I think we've had an opportunity now to listen to the objectors and what their concerns are. I think it's important for the efficient management of the rest of the meeting if we now move on to the next group of people who need to speak, which I think is the applicant. Provided you're happy with that, Chair, obviously.
Yes. Thank you very much. It's been very interesting to hear from you.
Thank you.
If you could just turn the mic off. Great. Thank you. So we move to the applicant or the applicant's agent. So, again, if you could say your name and who you work for, and then I'll give you 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm Pippa Krishnan. I'm the Programme Manager in Parks and Leisure for Southwark Council. The main aim of this planning application is to ensure that wheelchair athletes have a place to play sports within the new sports centre hub at Burgess Park. It also addresses the lack of basketball courts in the park. The idea of a ball court is not new, as one was proposed in the original planning application for the sports centre in 2019. This was removed from the plans due to the risk of ball strike from cricket, and the intention at the time was to add it back in once a suitable location had been identified. The Equalities Impact Assessment was carried out by a qualified access auditor and considered all protected characteristics. It made many recommendations, including that the ball court should be as close as possible to the changing room and toilet facilities in the new building, so as not to disadvantage people with disabilities. Locations were explored, and due to site constraints, the chosen location is the most feasible. There is an impact on the new mound next to the barbecue area, which would need to be made smaller to accommodate the ball court. The mound is currently in construction but not yet completed, and this would be a simple change to make while the contractors are on site. The barbecue area is currently closed, and barbecuing is not permitted in Burgess Park while we undertake a review, which will start with public engagement this summer. The barbecue area is a great resource for the local community, but is not without its issues. We look forward to finding a solution. Should the ball court receive planning permission, we would expect to be able to deliver it by autumn this year, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
It's well within time. Any questions? Councillor Harper?
Just the question I asked Gemma earlier about the multiple wheelchair users. Is it okay if I redirect that question to you? So kind of in terms of if there were multiple wheelchair users, if there was a tournament or, that is it actually realistic that they can use the changing facilities, toilets, etc. In the current provision?
In the building that we're building at the moment, there are 4 wheelchair accessible toilets, 2 wheelchair accessible changing rooms, and also a larger changing room which has been designed for rugby, which the access auditor advised could also be used by people in wheelchairs for changing. So I expect the team would need to arrive earlier to be able to get access to all of these facilities, but we have lockers in the corridor, so once the team finishes using the changing room, they'll put their stuff in the locker, and the changing room would then be free for anyone else to use. So I did consult with wheelchair sports teams, and they didn't bring this up as an issue, but I think it would be something it'd be good for me to go back and talk to them about, although we are at a point where we won't be able to make the building any bigger, but we can try and see what we can do to accommodate their needs.
Thank you, that was clear, and sorry I didn't get that when I was reading.
Councillor Hood?
Thank you. A key part of the objections I picked up was on the height of the fencing. Is lowering the height of the fencing a possibility?
No, I believe the 4.5 metre high ball stop fencing is a requirement of the Football Foundation as this sports hub is being built to their requirements.
Would it be possible to just remove the fencing around the basketball court?
I think for safety reasons of people passing by on the nearby pathways, we would want to keep high fencing, particularly at the goal ends. But the fencing has actually been installed at Burgess Park now, and I was on site recently, and actually from one side of the football pitch to the other, it's almost invisible. You can just see the fence posts. We had the fencing put in black to make it sort of blend into the environment as much as possible. So if you visited the park, you'll be able to see that it's as least visually intrusive as possible.
Councillor Batterson?
Thank you. You spoke a bit about considerations for people from different protected characteristics. So I just wondered if you could expand a little bit more on that and touch on who else we think this might be aimed at.
We did consultation also with the basketball team, as there are statistics to prove that basketball is more popular with the local Black, Asian and minority ethnicity population. and the basketball team were very keen to see a basketball court, particularly one that they could book to play matches. So that's why we've wanted to include it in the fencing, and it gives people the benefit of the using the toilet facilities and changing facilities as well. To go into the other protected characteristics, I'd have to go back to the Equalities Impact Assessment that is actually included in the application. So I don't remember all of them, but I believe we managed to follow pretty much all the recommendations in that report.
Could you tell us a little bit about the pricing structure? Is there any free sessions available to Burgess Sports?
I'd like to invite my colleague Jardine Finn, who is in the physical activities team and knows a lot more about the operation than I do.
Could you just state your name and who you work for?
Yeah, my name's Jardine Finn. I work for Southwark Council in the Sport Physical Activity team. Is this in relation to the basketball court specifically, or more generally on the project?
Generally on the project.
So an IDM was signed for this project prior to it starting. We had a Football Foundation funding for the development of the previous site that was knocked down, which had some protected times for sports development, community development activity. So the IDM that we got signed carried some of those over. So within the programming of the football pitches, on weekdays 3:30 to 5:30, there will be free-to-use slots for what we're calling partner clubs. So we'll work with local sports clubs, organisations to identify who those partners are, and those free slots are around really engaging children and young people in positive activity. We also have one of the pitches which will be free to use in holiday periods, school holiday periods. So again, for partner clubs, so they can access the site for free and deliver programmes for local children and young people.
And will there be some free slots for the basketball court?
I imagine most of the use of the basketball court will be free. It's not sort of a key sort of this is really a football facility, and the court is an addition to offer some additional play for children and young people, but I don't see it being a key thing that's booked. So I think the booking availability will be about people maybe wanting to do a competition, a summer event, and on that basis we'll book it so we can sort of set it aside for those activities, but on the whole I imagine it'll be a free to use.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for joining us. Sorry, could you come back? Do you know how many blue badge parking?
I can't actually remember off the top of my head, but there's a drop-off point which we added as a result of the Equalities Impact Assessment, as well as the blue badge parking, and the drop-off point is directly outside the entrance. Blue badge parking, three spaces?
It was a minimum of 2 to be provided as a planning consideration. But yeah, and then obviously the step-free access and drop-off points.
And is there somewhere for coaches, for example, or minibuses?
I believe there is a drop-off point on, which road is that? Not Coburg, the other one leading along that way. Neat Street. Neat Street? Yeah.
Thank you, sorry about that. Are there any supporters in the room who wish to speak? We have a ward councillor in the room. Would you like to come forward, please? Councillor McIntosh. So if you could state your name and then I'll give you 3 minutes.
I'm Councillor Kimberly McIntosh, one of the new ward councillors in Faraday. I'm sure I won't need a whole 3 minutes, but I'll get going. So I wanted to express some concerns about the objections that were raised in relation to the barbecue area that haven't been fully addressed by the proposals, which I'm happy to talk about further and invite questions for more information on that. I also wanted to express my understanding that the barbecue area does have some issues that the council needs to solve and look into, but that this shouldn't be predetermined in effect by the addition of the ball court in the plans, which at the moment does appear to be extending into the barbecue area and the adjacent picnic area. And I also wanted to express concern that the Equalities Impact Assessment doesn't give weight to the high usage of the barbecue area by the Latin American community in our ward and in the local area. And I'm happy to invite further questions on that as well.
Thank you, that's well within time. Anybody would like to kick off? Go on then.
Thank you, and thank you for coming along and presenting and highlighting an issue that otherwise would have been missed, so thank you for that. Now, my understanding from what we heard from officers, and we can ask a little bit more of that to them afterwards, was that the proposal was to relocate the barbecue area eventually, albeit I'm not quite sure what the process is for that, rather than lose it altogether. Is there anything particularly about the location of the barbecue area at the moment which lends itself to Latin American community, or is it just a concern that it might be lost and therefore that facility be lost to the community?
Yes, it's more of a concern that we'll lose the barbecue area. So as far as I'm aware, and I was only made aware of this meeting this morning as well as to the briefing for it, but there isn't confirmation about the reprovision of the barbecue area, at least of equivalent size and where it will be in the park, and that we have a consultation that will be opening in the summer, but we don't know the outcome of that consultation, but it appears that the plans assume that the barbecue area will be moved. So we just wanted to have more clarification on that and to know that at the very least the barbecue area will be provided at the same size within Burgess Park at a minimum, and I don't know if there's confirmation of that yet. Thanks.
Maybe we can ask the officer.
Yeah, so the barbecue area has been closed for a number of years now I think there was a couple of issues which the applicant will probably be able to go into in a bit more detail, but one of them was the existing issue between the existing sport pitches and the barbecue area, and smoke pollution and them two uses being used aside from each other. So that sort of pre this application, the barbecue area, it was closed and was proposed to stay closed until the Parks team had carried out a sort of full reconsultation to ensure that that facility was upgraded in terms of air pollution and smoke pollution, because obviously currently quite old facilities, but also to ensure that the location of that barbecue facility was suitable. So I believe there was already sort of an issue with the sports centre and the barbecue area. But yeah, I mean, the applicant will probably be able to give more detail on that. As I said, it was closed sort of prior to this application anyway.
Can I just ask a point of clarification? It was my understanding that the barbecue area initially closed due to COVID-19 restrictions rather than due to consultation.
It was so there was the COVID. I think there was a fire risk. So the London Fire Brigade gave advice on fire risk, some antisocial behaviour issues, and then smoke pollution with the adjacent sport use.
Any other questions of the ward councillor? No. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, go on.
Sorry, just a question. You were speaking about the barbecue area and the adjacent picnicking area, and I just wondered if you could kind of clarify that. I mean, I'm familiar with the ward, and that area of the park. I don't know if other people are. Is that okay, or is that a reasonable question? Okay.
So lots of families obviously use the barbecue area, but there's also an adjacent area kind of around the barbecue area that a lot of families use for picnicking. And in the objections of which there were many more objections from residents and that appeared to be in support of these plans, a lot of families wrote in to say that that's a space that they use particularly in the summertime, particularly because we have a lot of high density housing which doesn't have access to open space, and that will also be infringed upon in these plans. And so they're worried about losing the barbecue area but also the adjacent picnic area as well. And so any guarantees we could have on that too.
Anybody else? Thank you very much, Councillor McIntosh. So now, any other points of clarification for the officers?
Thank you. Just following on from that, so we've had 156 objections. Given the comments that's just been made by Councillor McIntosh, do you know how many of those related to the barbecue area? Was it a large number?
I couldn't give you the exact number, but I mean, a lot of the comments were the same issues. So yes, the openness, loss of openness, loss of the picnic area and the barbecue area did sort of come up quite a lot as a key concern from objectors. But yeah, I mean, I don't have all of them in front of me to comment.
Okay. Can I just ask for a sort of rough estimate? I'm not going to hold you to it or make you sort of sign it in blood.
I think that was a key issue in majority of the comments. Yes.
Okay. So, of the 156 objections, a third, quarter, half.
I can't say. I don't have the objections in front of me.
Right, okay.
But yeah, it was a key issue that cropped up in a lot of the objections was the impact on the openness, loss of the picnic area, the area that's been used for sort of informal recreation and picnic, and the impact on the adjacent barbecue area. Yeah, it's probably fair to say most comments brought that up.
Most comments brought up the loss of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Batterson.
Sort of following on from the points made about the barbecue space, if the smoke was an issue before and now with the addition of the ball court, we would have to assume that the barbecues could not remain in the same place they are now if smoke was the main issue. And I appreciate we might be getting onto another proposal here, but I mean, does this restrict the chances of having a barbecue area in the park altogether?
Can I just ask Sadia to come in?
I believe the consultation in respect to the barbecue area isn't a planning consultation, so I don't think that's because a subject, or it doesn't arise out of a planning application, but it's something that the parks team are carrying out. So that is scheduled to take place. In terms of I can understand why members are concerned about it and why objectors are, but it's not strictly speaking a material planning consideration, I think, because yes, this does infringe upon it, but there's no way of knowing what the outcome of that consultation will be, and you've got to determine the application before you right now.
Thank you.
I'm going to test that one out. Sorry, Sadia. So it felt very much as if the concern that was raised by Councillor McIntosh was that us agreeing to this development today was very unlikely to mean that the barbecue area would move, and it sounds as if the barbecue area may well need to move, whatever. But if this is making that move of the barbecue area more likely, if there is a concern amongst a group that has a protected characteristic, that cannot be provided somewhere else, or that this is the council doing something which means that facility is more likely to be permanently lost. How do we weigh that up in our consideration? Because that does feel as if it might be a planning concern if it is a loss of an amenity within the park to a group with a protected characteristic.
So there's a small amount of the barbecue area which is included within this red line. The fact that the ward member has expressed a concern that it might, loss of this amount of area might impact upon a protected group, that is something that you as the committee rightfully have to take into account. Is that, and it's a matter of planning judgment, I think, ultimately, is that enough for you to decide whether or not you wish to refuse the application? That's a matter for you to decide. The professional view of the officers is, based on the information that they have before them, that this application has got a recommendation to approve. Members are, able to come to their own view based on the information that they've got before them. And if you believe that the loss of this small area within the red line justifies refusal, then that's a matter of weight and balance for you.
Are we pitting one set of protected characteristics against another?
When you are discharging the public sector equality duty, and which is part of what you're doing here today, as well as determining this application in accordance with the development plan and material planning considerations, in effect, you have to have due regard. So you're having due regard to all of the protected characteristics, and it is right for you to consider whether or not there is an impact upon more than one group. It's just, the duty is to have due regard. The duty isn't to basically accommodate every single protected group, because that's not always possible. But you have to discharge the duty. You've got to consider it. The information is before you, and it's for you as a matter of the decision, as the decision maker, to decide which way you want to go.
So, thank you, Chair. It was almost like a clarification on your response to Councillor Livingston, sorry. How embarrassing. So you said that, because Councillor McIntosh's concern, I think, because it's the barbecue area and the adjacent picnicking area, which, as I understand, the viewing mound which is in the original plan, would still be kind of accessible for that kind of overspill, whereas even though the basketball court sits within that boundary of the original plan, mainly, apart from that little tiny bit, it isn't just that little tiny bit which is affected in the change. Does that...
You've got to consider the planning application before you, and the planning application has a red line, and you've got to... There isn't an application before you in respect of the barbecue area. If you believe the impact of this particular development, if you believe that there is an impact from this development on a group of people who have a protected characteristic, then you have to give regard to that impact. But it's for you as a decision maker to decide whether or not giving regard to that impact is sufficient, is enough for you to go one way or another. And I appreciate that's probably not as definitive as you would like me to be, but it is that's what planning is ultimately. It's a matter for the decision maker.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think because I am looking at this plan in comparison to the plan before this plan, and the plan before this plan didn't infringe on the picnicking space, even though the boundary. So does that mean do we have to consider, like, the original boundary, it was still mound, but, like, do we have to consider it like that original plan could have been something else? Does that make sense? The
extant planning permission is a material planning consideration, so that is something that you can take into account, that this is how it was before, but the proposal before you is for something different.
Thank you.
going to ask a potentially cheeky question, but I'll ask it, is whether there is scope for us as a committee to condition that consultation of a relocation of the barbecue as part of our decision today.
I was going to suggest an informative on our decision that the barbecue area be relocated.
Sorry, Chair, I was just wondering, as the applicants here, they taking on board, of course, Sadia, your comments about it not being material to this particular application necessarily, but whether Pippa might be able to talk about some of the consultation and some of the suggestions that might come forward for the barbecue area to provide members assurance.
Pippa, could you come forward? Could you tell us a bit more about the consultation re the barbecue area?
Yes. Luckily for you, I'm also project managing the barbecue area project. And I know the park very well. I've done quite a lot of projects there. So we don't really want to preempt the result of the public consultation because we're really keen to understand what people want. But considering the popularity of the barbecue area, I would be very surprised if people didn't want it re-provided elsewhere in the park. And we believe it's entirely feasible to re-provide an outdoor cooking space, potentially not in the same model due to the smoke and emissions issues, which are now contradictory to our climate change strategy. But we're keen to get ideas from the community and have a kind of dedicated space for people to enjoy food together as a kind of route of social cohesion. So it's definitely, I would say, feasible to relocate.
Can I just ask if it was the fire brigade's recommendation not to have it where it is now?
So the current barbecue area, I believe some of the first closures were due to the risk of fire, recommended by the fire brigade to close it on a temporary basis when weather was very hot. And that's another reason why we feel that this model of outdoor cooking may not be the best, because we want the barbecue area to be usable for as much as the summer as possible. And if we're getting very hot summers at the moment, if every time it gets hot it gets closed, then it's not really fulfilling what we want it to do. But we're really keen to get ideas from the community about what they want to see from this outdoor communal social area where everyone can meet up together. I think the social aspect of outdoor eating is what people really see as a positive for the community. So yeah, I think we've got hopefully a lot of good ideas coming our way.
And have you surveyed the characteristics of the people who normally use the barbecue area?
That's difficult to do now that the barbecue area is closed, but anecdotally people have noticed that it is often used by a South American community, and so we are going to ensure that we reach those members of the community when we do the consultation.
Any other questions? Pippa?
I think it's not related to. It was sorry. Tell me if I can't ask this question. Earlier you spoke about speaking to the kind of basketball teams in the area and the kind of desire for the basketball court from them. Is there like specific teams aside from I've forgotten the name of the wheelchair user sports kind of centrally, like that where is the demand coming from for the wheelchair accessible access specifically in this area? Am I allowed to ask that now? Yeah, okay, great, thanks.
During the consultation with the wheelchair sports teams, the London FA disability officer attended as well and said there was a demand for venues for power chair football for which this would meet that demand. The opinion of the members of the wheelchair sports teams were, if you build it, the teams will come. and the basketball team are very keen to expand their training, particularly for women's teams as well. So they said they were particularly looking for another venue, and particularly that there is a lack of provision of outdoor basketball courts in the borough. They're often located on housing estates and very close to properties, and so when kids try and use them, they get complaints about the noise. And if you go to those estates, you'll see lots of ball courts sitting empty because the young people are not able to use them. So this is a really great opportunity to provide this facility far enough away from properties so that that's not going to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pippa. So we move to debate. Does anybody wish to make any observations? Councillor Harper.
I realise that this has been stated, but to me it is a concern how many objections there were to this proposal compared to the number of supporters. When reading through some of the supports earlier today and yesterday, I did notice that a lot of them spoke about how it would be really great for there to be a facility for young kind of people to play, but I didn't really notice any, or didn't notice many, if any, from young people saying, I want this sport facility. It was more, it would be good for these people, which felt slightly like the support was kind of presumptive rather than kind of concrete. So that is a concern I have.
I don't know how many young people go on Southwark Council's website, planning portal.
Well, I mean, as Friends of Burgess Park were saying, they canvassed the kind of barbecue users and the picnic area users, and I think that probably did bring in a kind of wider kind of demographic of supporters or not supporters, and maybe that's something we can take note of in future consultations.
Councillor Livingston.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting discussion. I think Sadia's point about that balance of equalities duties, I thought was it's an interesting case here, isn't it, in terms of how we look at that. Having listened very carefully to debate and having had the chance to ask lots of questions and understand the situation, I do think where it comes down to that issue, there is a real issue here that if we weren't to approve this, that we would be in a position, I think, of excluding people who have a need for access to sports that the borough needs to provide better for. And that discussion around the barbecue convinced me that there is a way of re-providing that elsewhere in the park, and there's a process in which the council is committed to doing that. So I have one or two concerns overall. I think the point about the fence was well made by the objectors, but on balance I would be in favour of this proposal because I think it does far more good for the local community, and particularly the community that have protected characteristics, than us not approving this tonight, Chair.
Thank you. I couldn't have put it better myself. Anybody else wish to comment? Jane?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say, but not as eloquently, exactly that. One of the points that was made earlier about people with blue badges, we could ask that outside, you can have double yellow lines, but it can say blue badge holders can park here. Maybe we should do that as well, because as Councillor Livingston was saying, people in wheelchairs are often kind of invisible, and I suspect they'll be overjoyed that they have this opportunity to come and use facilities right beside a big football ground and all of this, and we do forget them. And as you said, the picnic area can be re-provided and the barbecue area can be, and it is going to be consulted on, and it won't disappear completely. It will just reinvent itself in a different way, more suitable for the fire brigade. But a facility for people with disabilities, you can only consider it sort of once. It won't get re-provided because it needs cars to get to it, it needs people to be able to use the facilities that will be in the larger sports centre. So I am minded also to support this as well. Thank you, Chair.
Shall we move to a motion?
Can I make a proposal for a condition of compliance that notes there is likely to be there will be a consultation on the barbecue area, but would like to see the kind of outcome of that being established within the next 12 months. So there is like a kind of promise being made to the people who objected that it's going to happen. We're not forgetting them. We're not prioritising. I just think that would go some way to kind of showing our kind of like value in that consultation, because obviously Southwark is really pro consultation. I think that's really good. But we just want to make sure we are listening to the consultation. But yeah, broadly, I kind of agree with Richard's points that it would be exclusionary to potentially turn this
Okay.
down.
Sadia, is there any way of doing that?
Maybe.
I'm just trying to think whether or not that meets the tests for a valid condition, and I have to admit I'm a little bit unsure about whether it does. I think Dennis's suggestion rather of an informative is probably the better solution, because I don't know what the timescales are for the consultation. I know they want to keep it open for long enough to enable people who use the park during the summer to be able to feed into that consultation, and I don't know whether putting a 12-month limit on an outcome is feasible, because that's not information that I think the committee's got before it, and I'm not sure whether it's reasonable for us to do so, but I think certainly an informative is probably the way to go.
Can I just draw members' attention to we have written an informative already on the decision notice, and whether that needs to be, or members would like that to be reworded. But it's page 24 of the members' pack, informative notes relating into applicant relating to proposed development. I don't know if that's the same page. I've got the same report as everyone else. But thank you. Yes, sorry, 75 at the top of the page, 24 at the bottom.
That kind of says that it's just going to stay closed. It doesn't say it's going to be relocated.
It says, just for the audience's benefit, it says, please note that this approval assumes that the adjacent barbecue area will remain closed until a full review of its suitable location and operation is undertaken by Parks and Leisure Directorate in the interest of public health and environmental protection.
Can I just ask Councillor Harper, what is it that you're hoping that the consultation will... So that consultation you want to take place within a certain amount of time in the interests of...
I would like the kind of consultation and kind of outcome of the consultation to be kind of as kind of implemented. Thank you. As a kind of gesture of kind of the council and planning's kind of consideration of the objections to this plan. So I want it. So this informative to me, yeah, it sounds like it could say it's going to stay closed indefinitely. Potentially, if this had just an extra clause that it's even just the consultation is going to take place within the next X months, I think that would be helpful to kind of demonstrate our commitment to it, if that makes sense.
Sorry, Sadie, I'm looking at you and you, Chair. I wonder whether an informative saying something to the effect that members have granted consent with the understanding that the Parks and Leisure Department will undertake a full consultation on the barbecue area and implement its findings. Would something like that be Okay.
I think that's probably okay from our perspective. It's not something that we would be able to enforce because obviously it's not a condition, but it's there for the applicant to know that members of the committee expressed a desire that the Parks team would get on with the consultation and implement whatever the outcome was. Yep.
I'm happy with that, thank you.
Can we move to a vote? I would like to move to a vote that we agree the officer's recommendation as on paper, including any amendments highlighted by officers and members in the addendum report and the conditions arising from the debate. Do I need to add anything else?
I think officers know about the informative.
Okay.
Just say with an informative.
Say again?
With an informative.
Okay.
As discussed.
With an informative as discussed by the committee. As follows. That planning permission be granted subject to conditions. Does anyone wish to second this? Councillor Salmon? Okay, all of those in favour to grant planning permission? All those against? One against? 6-4. So the motion is carried. And that concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you all very much for attending. Now we can catch up on the news.